Hey there, welcome to First Look. Joining you from another edge of Frick Park, not the same one that I usually am, but I'm street side here and just taking a little bit of a walk. So, thank you for joining me this time. We're getting to the end of this current season. And what we've been doing here lately is talking about this season of identity. And so I've been kind of taking that from the beginning of October and marching you through all these different types of weeks. And so it ends right here with what they call the Reign of Christ, or traditionally Christ the King Sunday. And so that means that the next time we're doing this, it'll be Advent. And I think I'm ready for Advent. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I feel like I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's already here. But now I feel like I'm in the mood for it. I feel like I'm good to go. So we'll see how it is. But for now, we're doing this Reign of Christ. And before I forget, I want to direct you to the passage because again, walking, so don't have it right in front of me, but I wanted to give you the text so that you can look it over. So it's John 18, verses 33 through 37. So John 18, 33 through 37. So why don't I'll do my famous pause face. You can pause for a moment and then we can get back to it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, you're back. So I always find these texts, they're not out of place, but I think it's always a little odd for some reason to be looking at this particular part of Scripture right here and right now, because it feels so much like a Lenten, leading up to Easter kind of text. And of course it is that kind of text, which is why it feels that way. And so, but we have this passage here for the obvious reason that it talks about the authority of Jesus, the place of Jesus as a king or as a ruler over humanity. And so we look at the contrast between how we think about that in sort of transcendent, eternal ways versus how Jesus talks about it in very temporal, like the kings, the rulers of this age kind of a way. And the juxtaposition of that's all very intentional. So this passage is paired with a text in Daniel. And if you know anything about Daniel, you know that a lot of it is sort of looking at the first half of Daniel looks at his life in Babylon, but then the second half really is very prophetic and looks at what is to come. It's supposed to be very hopeful for the people who are in exile, and so it's there to do that. And so the passages that we look at in Daniel kind of look at this, the ways that God will step into history and right the ship, so to speak, will help the people of Israel with power and might, that kind of thing. It's sort of a precursor to the way we understand what a Messiah will be. So we look at that, and then we look at this passage that Jesus is having this very famous conversation with Pontius Pilate. And yeah, there are a lot of different ways that I like to look at the relationship, I don't know, the relationship might be the encounter. Let's say the encounter. I don't think that Pilate and Jesus have enough of a back and forth for long enough to say they have a relationship. Let's say the encounter. Pilate, I think, is another one of these people that in some ways perhaps is vilified more than he deserves, and in other ways not as much as he deserves, which I think is obviously odd, but let me try to explain what I mean. Pilate is in one of those places where he doesn't really care what happens to the person in front of him. He just cares that a problem goes away. And I think if you understand a little bit about what it means for Jesus to be seen the way he's seen in that society, he doesn't really care whether he's thinks of himself as a zealot or the king of the Jews or any of these things. That isn't his main concern. His main concern is his own authority. And Jesus is a threat to that authority. And even if he was the king of the Jews, it really wouldn't matter until, like if he was going to try to take over from Herod or something. The biggest problem that would pose for someone like Pilate is that he would have to figure out if this is someone he could control or not. Because Herod had, who was the king of the Jews, had proven himself to be very controllable. You know, he was someone that tried to prove himself a worthy asset to Rome. You know, he had tried to build Israel into this almost like a mini Rome. I mean, the architecture of a lot of the cities and the ideas that they use in city planning, a lot of that is very, very Roman inspired. And, you know, he rules over Israel with a kind of self-preservation in mind. And all of this is something that Rome likes. You know, they appreciate that this is who Herod is. And so the only thing that Jesus really does in contrast is a zealot would potentially mess up that dynamic. You know, you would want, if you're the empire, you want the people that you rule over to just sort of be quiet, recognize the authority of the empire, don't steer us in any kind of odd direction, don't mess with the power dynamics, do your life, and we'll let you continue to do your life the way that you want. And so some of his questions, some of Pilate's questions, like, are you the king of the Jews, is kind of trying to tease out, are you going to be a problem for me, or are you just a problem for them? What are your aspirations? You know, what are your, are you someone who poses a threat to me, or are you not? And I don't think that Jesus gives him a very satisfying answer, because he kind of makes Pilate work for it. And so he basically says, as you read in that text, my kingdom is not of this world. Yes, I am the king because I was made to be, but it's not in the way that you might think I might be, or the powers that be believe that I might be seeking for myself. I'm not trying to simply gather a group of people together and start this kind of coup. I'm trying to do something else. I'm trying to free the people in a different way. I'm trying to care for the people in a different way. I'm trying to speak truth to power for a different reason. Not because it will ultimately give me the chance to become a ruler or to become powerful or whatever, but because it will set the people free to something else. And I think that that's confounding to Pilate. I think you see him struggle with it because he realizes that, well, this isn't the threat to me or my authority in the way that I feared. So I guess I'll try to wash my hands of it. But ultimately, Jesus, of course, was enough of a threat. One, to Pilate didn't stick his neck out, right? He had in no way says, well, I'm going to go to bat for this person. I'm going to make sure the Sanhedrin leaves him alone. I'm going to do something, assert my power so that the Jews just, let him go. He takes this both and position. Because again, he doesn't ultimately really care about Jesus the person. He's just trying to make a problem go away. And what he basically does to make the problem go away is that he gives over the final say to the Sanhedrin, and they make the decision. Because Jesus, of course, had openly threatened the authority of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. He had done all that over and over and over again. And so the Sanhedrin saw him as a threat, not only to the delicate balance that was there between Rome and the Jews, but also the religious authority of the people, of the Jewish people. So that's why all of this kind of goes the way it does. So you're left with this kind of issue where you realize that you have to start to define, what does it mean for Jesus to be one of authority? And it's a lot easier to talk about that as in the eternal sense than it is in the political sense, because we can kind of get our heads around what it means for Jesus to be the ruler over our lives in the Alpha and Omega way, because we understand Jesus from a divine standpoint, even maybe more than we understand him from an earthly standpoint. And I named this particular sermon, I think it was "Where is My Kingdom?" Because I want to kind of talk about the struggle of what it means for us to have Jesus be an authority in our lives from a moral standpoint, a theological standpoint, a eternal life kind of standpoint, which is much more personal, versus what it means for Jesus to be authoritative in a community standpoint. Because when you see Jesus, I think what is easy for us to do is to take some of the moral teachings of Jesus and try to apply them to the way we live our lives or our political systems or whatever. But when we start applying the Jesus that we see, that is often resistant to empires and authorities, and who is for the people and is inclusive and is trying to fight for the rights of those who are on the margins, and we start to apply that on a bigger scale politically, and try to figure out, well, what does it mean for the kingdom to be in our midst right now? Like, what creates that? That's where it starts to get really difficult, because then it becomes political in some way, shape, or form, right? You start to think about, like, what kind of society would Jesus want us to exist in? And literally, how would we get here, right? It's November of 2024. The world is the way it is. How is it supposed to be, and how are we supposed to act in order to help get it there? And that, in a world where we don't agree very often about how the world should work, and we have a hard time trying to figure out what of Jesus to take literally, what to take figuratively, how to live it out, that becomes a big challenge. And, when we think about our opinions on that, the fact that we're moving more and more towards Thanksgiving, I think, is this, that's a really good example of how trying to live that out or understand it, or talk about it with other people, can get tricky. Because what I mentioned on Sunday was, I had this thought about, Thanksgiving is coming up relatively soon. It's a little over a week away, and you're going to see family, you're going to see people you haven't seen in a while, you're going to see, aunts and uncles and parents or children or whatever, and many of us have gatherings where politics or society or whatever doesn't come up, and for some of us it's the only thing that comes up. And for some people that can be like a point of connection, and for other people it's a point of real contention. And I think as a pastor, especially of a church where I know that we talk about the fact that Northmont's a place where some people think X and some people think Y in terms of society and how it should be structured, and morality and politics and theology. It's a blend of things, because Northmont is a blend of different people and perspectives. Trying to come into those spaces where we're discussing what's important to us and why it's important to us can be hard. Because, you and I can both say we want Jesus to be an authority in our lives and mean it very differently. And, I think that as someone who does take, his faith and his role very seriously, I think a part of what's hard for me is trying to navigate that with people. Because I obviously talk about my own faith, and I talk about my role in the church, and I talk about, how I understand what love means and what community means. And we might be saying the same words, but we could live them out very differently. And it's not one of those things after a while that is always is comfortable to have different opinions about. There are subjects that we, within the church and within our families, where if you think something else than I do, it's not just a difference in opinion. It means the way that you treat other people would be different than the way I would treat them. That's when I think that breaks down, is that I would see someone as a neighbor that you wouldn't see as a neighbor. or the other way around. Someone that you would see as a neighbor, I would have a hard time seeing as a neighbor. And that's the really tough part. If I wouldn't be kind to the people you would be kind to, or you wouldn't be kind to the people I would be kind to, that's where it doesn't just become a, hey, it's politics and we all have different opinions and let's just, whatever. If you can't see me as a person, or if I can't see you as a person, well, that becomes a problem. Or if I can't see the person you're partnered with, or if I can't see your sibling, or if I can't see the new person you bring home for Thanksgiving as a full person, that becomes a problem. Because then it's not just an opinion, the rubber's hitting the road. And, a lot of what we talk about when it comes to Jesus is, what is his intentions for our lives? Is he saying, I want my kingdom here, and that means this rule and this rule and this rule, this is allowed and this is allowed? Or does it mean something very, very different? That's, I think, the part of this that is so confounding and hard for me is that two people who claim Jesus and two people who claim that they want to see God's love in the world be manifest can mean that in very, very different ways. And that can be not only hard, but it can be painful. And I think that's what makes my job, your job, our job really hard, is not everybody sees church the same. Not everyone sees God the same. And when someone doesn't see God the way that we do, it can be hurtful. I talk with a lot of you about how you think differently, or your children think differently, or your friends think differently about just even the concept of church. And I am constantly kind of in a place where I still think that the biggest barrier to people accepting or thinking favorably about what church is are people who go to church. I meet with people who, when I tell them I'm a pastor, they think, oh yeah, that I can see that. Yeah, of course you are. And other people who think, really? And for a lot of different reasons. And I think it still comes down to the way that you not only accept them, but the way that you accept or talk about people that they care about. And I think that we ignore that too often. You accepting the person in front of you or loving the person in front of you is first and foremost to what we should be doing. But we're also going to be judged on some level by how we talk about the people that the person in front of us love, right? If someone in your life can't bring up someone that they care about because they're not sure how you'll treat them, or vice versa, that's where things break down. That's where politics at the Thanksgiving table becomes very real. And I think when we talk about the reign of, or the kingship of, or the authority of Jesus in our lives, we have to take those things into consideration, because it does change everything. It changes the way that we see each other. And I think we have to be willing to be honest about that with ourselves, and self-reflective, not just defensive, not just shrug our shoulders and wish that it was simpler. Our dynamics with our society and our dynamics within our country, our communities, our families are not going to get simpler unless we just push everyone away in our lives and just keep it to the 2 or 3 people that agree with us. We have to keep reflecting. And I think that's the last thing I'd like to say about this season of identity, is that part of understanding yourself is trying to get your mind around why people love you the way that they do, right? What are your qualities that people are really drawn to? But then also examining what people struggle with when it comes to you. I think about that constantly. And sometimes I can get my head around it, and sometimes I can't. But trying to examine yourself and examine, what do I bring into people's lives that's positive, but what do I potentially bring into people's lives that's negative? That's a lot of what it means to, I think, just to be a person, but specifically to be a person of faith. You're going to proclaim this thing. What does that mean for how you treat me? And what does that mean for the way that you treat the person I care about? That's it. So as we kind of round this season out, my hope is that we can continue to not be afraid to think about all of that, because that's the way that I think that we make headway with people who are still struggling with what church means. So that's what I'm thinking about this week. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for thinking through those ideas with me. If you have questions or you ever want to talk to me about that, I certainly don't do this perfectly, so I'd love to talk to you about it. Thank you for being you. Thank you for looking at this scripture. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.